Well, good morning, everybody. Because of the emerging evolutionary nature of Hocus Focus, myself and Sarah have been what we started out was a pure Fortean show, and still is at its heart, is somehow kind of migrating through a kind of osmosis towards a hauntological theme. Hauntology is something myself and Sarah both have an enormous interest in, and it's not surprising it has become a central part of Hocus Focus. Now, as a result, people have been asking me, particularly in America, can you explain what hauntological culture is and what hauntology is and how it differs from childhood or growing up nostalgia? Well, that's the question right there. Nostalgia would be looking back at a photo album, a listening to a record you had as a teenager, or an old video or footage of your neighborhood and having a sense of pleasant recognition of what you're watching, thinking about people you knew, happy times, and so on. In hauntology, the feeling that you're having in the now experiencing these things is exactly the same as what you felt at the time you were experiencing them. And hauntology, rather than nostalgia or reminiscing, is the sensation that has an almost otherworldly energetic resonance within you that has you nostalgic for something that never was in many ways. An example would be that you were raised in what you wanted to be a utopia or what you were told could be a utopia. This would be very common for people who grew up in the post-war period. People who are on the cusp of the boomer Gen X age, demographic like myself. And this unfulfilled sense of purpose is encapsulated by the cultural, pop cultural tropes of the time. Now, hauntology is not necessarily rooted in happy memories. It can be rooted in memories that are kind of dark, but they're also pleasant in the way that they give you a reassurance that your life is on a certain trajectory. And it makes you understand not only the evolution of culture when you were growing up, but the evolution of yourself looking back. I'll give you an example of how, when I was growing up, a hauntological experience that entered into my life that kind of encapsulates what I'm talking about. When I was a young kid, there was a series of movies on TV or documentaries or a series of film festival kind of thing on the TV of World War II propaganda movies. And it started because someone had found some Irish World War II propaganda movies that were made by the Germans that were supposed to inspire the Irish. Well, some of them are quite good actually, but they're well made films by the UFA thing. And I found that remarkable that there was people made films that were openly propaganda. So I watched the series, and then they showed one called The Silent Village. The Silent Village was a British World War II documentary drama, like we call a mockumentary today. And it was about if the Battle of Britain had have been lost, what a Third Reich occupation of Britain would be like. And there's a few of these. There's one of them called Went the Day Well. But The Silent Village is a short film, basically, and it takes place in a Welsh mining village in the valleys. So even the characters in the background are often speaking Welsh in a kind of like Middle Wales kind of way. And the director and the writers were inspired by what happened to, I think it's Ladice, and the name of the town, in Czechoslovakia, which everyone was exterminated by the SS over the murder of a top Nazi official. It was Reinhard. His name will come to me, but so they said this could happen here. Now, what makes the Silent Village remarkable is that the only presence of the power that's shown is a black van type car that drives into the town every day and blasts music and propaganda from the occupational Nazi government through a gigantic loudspeaker on the top. Now, this was the first time as a child I watched something and said, you can tell a story without telling a story. And you can also, I began to understand at an early age that you can tell the story more effectively than if it's overt. So the simple act of a black car pulling into the valleys in Wales, stopping, and orders being issued by the Nazi occupational government through a gigantic speaker on the roof, had more of a psychological impact than if they showed SS officers goose-stepping around the town in Wales or anywhere in the UK. It made me realize you could tell a story without actually directly telling it through the kind of the concept of, what they call in poetry assonance, where the term doesn't actually rhyme with the word it's supposed to rhyme with. It's a kind of it's basically not, it's a way of playing with the rhymes, but you could do it in a film-making sense as well. And literature and everything else. Now, what's interesting about that speaker on that speaker van in the Silent Village is it came into reality after World War II when some Orwellian bright spark in the BBC decided that they could create a thing called a TV detector van that could be used to enforce payment of the TV license. In the UK, Ireland, and quite a few other countries like Germany and the Czech Republic, they still have the TV license. But the BBC, being what it is, with its its eternally embedded MI5 mindset, Big Brother mindset, Room 101 mindset, created a concept of the detector van having all this machinery on the roof, like the Ghostbusters ambulance, that they said was capable of detecting a television set in your house if you weren't paying your license. So they would have ads on the TV saying, TV detector vans are operating in your region. If you don't have a license, you could face a severe fine or a prison sentence. And then in some of them, they show heavies jumping out of the van while this antenna spun around on the roof. Now, while there was equipment in there, in the van, that was capable of detecting a television, it had no more ability to detect a television from an oven, an electric oven, or an electric twin bar heater. It could only pick up electromagnetic signals. So a cathode ray tube, a radio switched on, a record player stereo system, a twin bar electric heater, or an electric cooker hob would set off the similar signal. So they couldn't tell for sure. The thing was purely smoke and mirrors. It was a ruse. They didn't really have the ability to detect the TV in your home. But that didn't matter. In the same way the loudspeaker van in the Silent Village imposed psychological terror upon the population in this rural Welsh village, the same thing happened with the TV detector van. And it went right on until very recent times. And even in the early 2000s, they said they could now had a machine that could detect a widescreen TV if the thing was even switched off. And the RT in Ireland, having no originality of their own, also copied the TV detector van thing. And I can honestly tell you, people lived in terror of this. Like back then in the 70s, there wasn't much money around. So it's not like now where people have more disposable income compared to then. If you couldn't afford a TV license, it was because you literally had to eat. You didn't have the money. Or, and so when the TV detector van came around, you would literally have comical scenes of the dad or the older brother jumping into the wardrobe holding the television set in case the heavies, which legally weren't able to enter the house anyway, would come in. And so people who didn't pay their license lived in the license fee, lived in terror of TV detector vans in the same way the Welsh village did of the Nazi loudspeaker van. Obviously, the same people were in the BBC had said, that's a great idea, let's bring it into the TV detector van. Now, not only that, you have memories as a child watching these public service ads saying, pay your TV license or you might go to prison. TV detector vans are operating in your area. The sensation that we had as kids watching those ads on the television is exactly the same as what we have now thinking about it. It's not nostalgia. It created a certain energetic, sympathetic resonance within you that remains with you. It remains with you. And it becomes part of your culture. Like, for instance, I think they were Dinky and Corgi made, these were an English die-cast model car maker, made beautiful model toys in die-cast, and they made a TV detector van, and I had it, and they also made a loudspeaker van, you know? Now, this stays with you your life. This thing stays with you all your life. You remember this. Thank you. Someone just dropped me a few quid there. Thanks very much. That'll come in very handy. The phones are tight at the moment. God bless you, whoever you are. I don't have my glasses, but thank you very much. That's a nice surprise for a Wednesday afternoon. But you don't have a nostalgic feeling. Now, people say, well, the 70s was really about shit fashions, and I totally get that. But we don't remember that part of it. We're not looking back and saying the shit fashions of the 70s were good, or the pop music of the 70s, which was excellent, was great. It's not that. It's the entire encapsulation, the entire feeling, the entire sensation. And this is why so much of it is connected to what we would call dark TV shows. If you're coming to the event in Preston, the Mysterious Earth Conference, you'll hear Greg Moffat deliver a talk about this. But that's it, we had Children of the Stones, the Tomorrow People, all these other shows that had Joe 90, even the puppet show, quite unbelievably dark. Have you ever watched Joe 90? He's a murderous assassin, on top of the fact that his father uses him as a lab rat. But we grew up with all this, the Mysterons in Captain Scarlet. And then it kind of all finished with, at the end of the 70s, with Blake Seven. We had the golden age of Doctor Who during this period. And at the same, like, you could watch the TV show and then go to the shop with your pocket money, buy the Dinky or Corgi model of the element that was in the show, whether it was a TARDIS or a TV detector van or the transporter from Space 1999 or anything like that, and then go back home, or the Airfix kit of something, and then go back home and build it. Then you could read your Marvel comics, your 2000 AD comics, your Action comics, your Warlord comics, and your American comics like Warren, Creepy, Eerie, and Vampirilla. And it was all at the same time Young Americans by David Bowie is playing on the radio. You may have been cold, you may have been damp, you may have been part of the power being switched off 3 nights a week, but I can remember during the oil crisis in Ireland, they had blackouts, rolling blackouts as a little kid. Well, I can tell you, the sensation of walking around Ballymun at 9 o'clock in the evening as a young kid in pitch blackness was magical. Was magical. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why. Now, was it magical in the beautiful sort of Wizard of Oz, click, click, your heels 3 times? No, it wasn't like that at all. It was hauntological. And then you would go to I can remember taking the number 16 bus from Ballymun, an enormous journey right across Dublin to up in the Dublin mountains, Massey's Mansion past Rathfarnham, and walking up to the Hellfire Club, a real place of the occult, stopping by the megaliths in Massey's Mansion, and looking at the city from the top of a mountain, and then going back in the afternoon after getting to the bus stop while it's getting dark through this deep ancient forest, and then back home across a European capital city and into your house. Gosh, that was, I feel very privileged to experience that. And I'm sure those of you who grew up in Manchester, Liverpool, London, Edinburgh, no, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Belfast, wherever, Leeds, Nottingham, you all felt the same. You all went through that same experience. And the ones who were around the same age as me. And I think the hauntological experience was part of the intensity of being alive, the thrill of being. Although it was a terrible time in many ways. There was terrorism. There was terrible sectarian war in Ireland. There was bombs going off all over, not just in the IRA in Britain and Ireland and the UVF, but there was also like Baader Meinhof in Germany, and you had Brigada Rosse in Italy. You had like awful terrorist attacks all over the place. You had Black September and groups like this, blowing up train stations. And the news was filled with horrible stuff every night. But even that program I spoke about, like World in Action, with that music from Nantucket's Sleigh Ride, that organ sound, it was depressing. It was lonely, but it was beautiful at the same time. It was almost like a specific kind of cultural melancholy, but you were feeling the melancholy and the hauntological nature of it back then and also now. So it's not like, oh, I look back on those days, oh, those were the days. It's not like that again. I will go on, and YouTube had played a huge part in resurging a lot of this stuff, because all these programs and TV ads and everything I'm talking about started appearing on YouTube. And you would be watching them, and you would be watching them going, oh, those were the days. You'd be watching them going, I am literally back when I was 10. I'm here. I'm in the same 10-year-old. So I think the hauntological thing, rather than what say nostalgia is, the hauntological thing targets the lower poles of cognition, the deepest subconscious feelings that you were feeling at those days, are very raw, and you're not traumatized by them. In fact, if anything, you get a sense of not pleasure but satisfaction from them, because you realize that the decisions that you've made in your life ever since those days has been affected by it. That's why I am who I am. That's why I took an interest in serial killers, because I can remember hearing about the serial killers in England, like the Yorkshire Ripper, and my mother telling me about the Moors murders. I was too young to remember that, but my mother telling me about, like, Maura Hindley and the tape recordings that were played in school. And what was on TV at the same time? Well, Jimmy Savile was everywhere, not just he was all over Irish TV as well, non-stop. He was always visiting here. So Jimmy Savile was in your face. So that was when it came to me doing my work on Jimmy Savile, being the accomplice of Pete of Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, and now that's been validated as almost certainly true. That was because of that hauntological continuum. And so that's what it is. Now, from an American point of view, what would hauntology really be? There was a TV show in the 60s and 70s called Dark Shadows, which was about vampires in Collinstown in Maine. And it's still, if you go back and watch them, if you start, not so much the early ones, but the 67 series on, when the vampire Barnabas Collins comes in, that's actually, I could only imagine the effect that had on people, kids coming home from school and seeing that. No wonder the ratings were through the roof. It was the nearest, that was American hauntology. And that's where the likes of Stephen King and everything came from. In fact, my video on this channel of Booksport, Maine, Booksport serves as the real-life inspiration for Collinsport in the Dark Shadows TV show. And There was things like, I was talking to someone there about it last night, and it's true. Green eggs and ham. What the hell, Doctor Sue? What the hell is that all about? And then there's the softer elements of it, like the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. That'd definitely be American hauntology. And it, there's not as much to the same depth as we had in Britain and Ireland, because life was darker here. Life was darker here. We were living in, we were poorer. We had lots of industrial disputes, strikes, rolling blackouts, terrible terrorism problem. In Ireland, we had a war. And uh, so the depth of the cultural tropes, the cultural influences on the TV were generally darker, but embedded very, very deeply. Very deeply. And I think one of the things that this wave function collapse that's happening is that world will come back now for people in a different way. In fact, I like to think Hocus Pocus is part of that revival. And I think this is why you're going to have more people talking about it. Greg Moffat on Legalized Freedom has brought it up quite a lot. And I think definitely we're going back into, what does that world mean? Is it a better world in that sense? No. Is it a happier, more content world? No. But it's a richer world by experience. And that experiential feeling is worth everything when you want to make something of your life. So that's hauntology versus nostalgia. I hope I cleared it up a bit better, and light up the comments and tell me your memories, your feelings. And I'd like to know more about not only Americans with a deeper level of hauntology, but also Europeans, because we don't hear a lot. I do remember there was a series called Adventure on the Danube Delta from Eastern Europe that was kind of like a European version of, I don't know what country, I think it was Austrian or something like that originally. But go for it, because I can tell you something. It's a beautiful thing in its own mysterious, indescribable way, hauntology. And yeah, that's it. Take care. Look after yourselves.